Our speaker tonight retired from the University of Oregon 14 years ago as Emeritus Professor of Geology. In the course of his 45-year career, he has written over 100 scientific papers and authored or co-authored some dozen books. His publications include 3 books co-authored with his wife, Elizabeth Orr: Geology of the Pacific Northwest, Geology of Oregon, and Oregon Fossils. These books are the standard references to Oregon and the Pacific Northwest geology and paleontology. Since 1982, he has served as director of the Condon Museum of Paleontology at the University of Oregon. Tonight, he is going to discuss biomimicry. Please welcome Dr. William Orr.
Maybe you heard in the back. I turn the lights out. Let's see. I live over, when I retired from university in Eugene, I sold my house there, and I have property over in Marion County, and I live there. And I've had that property since 1968. One of the things I did during the time I was in harness at the university, I wrote a column for the local paper. And it was really neat. I just wrote on geological or fossils or things like that around the Silverton area. I wrote a column for the newspaper. It was really neat. I had a byline, Dr. William Orr, columnist. It was really, I thought it was really So and then one day my kids were at school. They said, what does your dad do? Oh, my dad's a fireman, dad's a policeman. What does your dad do? Oh, my dad's a communist. They said it. My wife said, that's about right. That's pretty good. How many of you have grandchildren here? Okay, and I've got 2, and a little girl, a little boy. And when the boy was born, his mother had lost her job. She was a teacher there at Clackamas, and she forgot she could continue your insurance, but she didn't do that. So the boy was born, normal birth, but a little more expensive than it used to be. So they owed $10,000. And I said, you owe $10,000? Yes, I didn't have the money. They said, give me that invoice. I wrote a check, okay? I own that baby. Okay, let's talk about what we call biomimicry, where we copy things that animals and plants have done. We call it fossil form and function. There are 2 kinds. I'm a geologist, but there are 2 kinds of paleontology. My specialty is fossils and paleontology. 2 kinds of paleontologists. I'm the latter type, or the former, I guess you'd say, the geologists who are paleontologists use fossils to tell about the environment. They want to know how old the rocks are. They want to know if the water was salty or if there was water, or how deep or how shallow or how much energy there was. They want to use the fossils. They want to exploit the fossils to get information to use for geologic problems. The other kind of paleontologist is what we call a pure paleontologist, and they're just treating fossils as biologic objects that don't happen to have liver, guts, and gall, just the shells. And that it's kind of a biological paleontologist, and that's not my persuasion. But one of the most difficult things about fossils is to figure out how these things lived. Let's see if I can change the slide here. What we call functional morphology is to look at an organism, the skeleton one, and figure out what the animal did for a living, what was its niche and habitat, and so forth. We can say that if the features on an organism, plant or animals, appear over and over and over again, they have some function. Nobody does something just for laughs. They will say trying to figure out what that function is on a living animal is usually just a matter of looking at it, watching it for a while, observing. But on fossils, it's very, very difficult. And it's, as I said, almost an art form. With fossil plants in particular, you rarely get the whole plant. The plant's usually separate. The pollen's over here, the leaves are over here, the bark and wood are somewhere else. They almost always separate. Then the main thing that makes it hard is usually if there's a plant, there's an insect in the equation, and that makes it really hard because it's very rare to see insects fossilized. But I'll show some examples of that. So we'll look at some examples. We'll just look at some functional morphology. If you look at corrugations, and all of you have seen this as a shellfish, but it's a 500 million year old shellfish, a brachiopod. Clearly the animal, look at the top picture, it's gregarious. They live in, they're not colonial, but they live in groups, they're grouped together. Individually, they have these very well developed corrugations, and we use those corrugations to identify the species. But a corrugation is just like a corrugation on a cardboard box. It's a way of adding strength without adding weight. If you put a cardboard down and then make it corrugated, you increase the strength of the box about between 4 and 7 times. It's just a way to have something very lightweight and yet very strong. So corrugations are pretty simple. If you look at another example, this is a little bit younger fossil, only 15 million years from the coast here. Again, it's corrugated. It's a different, this is a mollusk, the other one was a brachiopod, completely different, but the same kind of corrugations. And again, it's a way of strengthening the shell. There's a lot of organisms out there that will eat shells like this, like sharks. And this will, won't stop it all the time, but it slows it down a little bit. But corrugations are a way of adding strength without adding excessive weight. If you look at spines on the back, this is a trilobite, and it's about 3 or 4 inches long. You can see the compound eye like an insect on the right-hand side. Then this hedgehog or porcupine arrangement of spines along the back, clearly defensive. Well, that's a fair guess, that there's some kind of defensive spines. But sometimes when we see spines, like here's another trilobite, and this thing is about as big as a dinner plate. The spines on the top are like horns going back, but the spines that stick out on the side are in one plane, like your finger. They're not arranged like that. It's like your hands. So you got to ask yourself, what is the function of the spines in just one plane? We'll look at the example. There are other trilobites that do the same thing. This guy has spines also, but they're not sticking out, they're not defensive, they're sticking out to the side, almost feather-like. They're sharp and spiky. This is about a 4-inch trilobite, would be 400 million years old. But I think we know what he did for a living. Okay, let's look at some animals for a minute here. In this illustration, what I've done is plot up on this axis, right here. This axis here is time. So we go from what I call the Cambrian to the Ordovician. 570 MYBP is millions of years before the present. So about 500 million years old. The Cambrian starts here and ends at about 505 million years ago. This period of time we call the Cambrian. So we've got time in this axis. We move from the Cambrian to the Ordovician. So we've gone from 570 to a 438. We're just looking at a little window, a little piece of time here, plotting time along this way. And then plotting here, we're plotting the ocean floor. This is the beach up in here. This is the continental shelf. And the edge of the shelf out. Then we got the water up on top. So we're plotting water depth versus time. If we let each one of these colored bars represent a group of animals or a certain kind of animals, we make an interesting observation. These things, like this red thing, it first appears in the geologic record, not out here in deep water, it first appears lowest here in the surf. Every one of these things, the yellow, whatever that yellow thing is, it makes its debut, if you wish, in shallow water, coastal, high-energy water up on the beach or near the beach. And as time goes by, this thing kind of moves in effect. Then it gets out here on the continental slope in 1,000, 1,500 feet of water, it dies. So these animals are evolving here in shallow water, and then they're sort of walking across over millions of years. We're talking a lot of time here. They move across the continental shelf into deeper water, and then they go extinct. And this is the trend we see with a lot of animals, at least marine animals. They tend to, new species appear in shallow water, and then over time, they're not the same specimen, but they tend to move their habitat into deeper and deeper water, and then they finally disappear or they go extinct out here. By the time they get extinct, they're in very deep water indeed. Kind of an interesting trend. So we can say that, oops, I skipped one. We'll say in summary of that, it says new species appear in shallow, sandy, high-energy water in the surf zone, but extinction takes place in the cold, deep outer continental shelf water. It's kind of definitely a trend there. All right, in that deep water, there's little sunlight, if any, very low temperatures, it's almost freezing, and the seafloor environments there are a very soft, muddy bottom. The substrate is very soft. You can put your hand in it, you can't even feel your hand going into it. On that soft substrate, a major problem that animals face is a tendency to sink into the mud. They can last in the water, but if they're exchanging oxygen or feeding, they tend to sink into the mud. So they will have strategies of preventing that from happening, we think. Look at some of those strategies. All right, so there's about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these. One of those, we'll see examples, is called the snowshoe, and all that just means you spread your weight over a broad area. So you don't weigh much in one spot, okay? Another one is called the iceberg, where you sink all right, but just your head is above water. Most of your body is underwater, the iceberg. Another one's called the Tahitian house, where the body is elevated on little stilts off the bottom. You have little stilts sticking off the bottom. One called the outrigger canoe, where you distribute the weight on these long rods. You distribute the weight on long rods. And then finally, what I call the Hindenburg. This is the anniversary of the Hindenburg. Where the body of the animal is inflated. If I had a balloon here and then had it inflated, if I just dropped the balloon without any water, it would just drop to the bottom of the room here on the floor. But if I filled it with air, it would slowly drop down and kind of bounce along the bottom. A Hindenburg animal inflates its body not with air, but with water, and it sort of floats along the bottom. It's on the bottom, but doesn't tend to sink in very much. Okay, you inflate the body with fluid, so you just sort of suspend it just above the bottom. 5 strategies to deal with a very, very soft bottom. Let's look at some of these things. Does it look like a jerk? It does to me. Okay, the snowshoe strategy. The snowshoe strategy is one good example is a little brachiopod. This guy is about 450 million years old, and he's paper thin, very thin. He's got some little corrugation on the side here, very thin. I think this is using the snowshoe strategy. He's sort of sitting on the bottom. The strange thing about this particular species of brachiopod is you always find it in the core, not next to it. Okay, let's look at another example of a animal like that. This is a mollusk. This is not a brachiopod. This is a mollusk. Same appearance, a flat shell. It's got corrugation, really paper thin. Very, very fragile, paper thin. Classic snowshoe strategy. To keep from sinking in, it distributes your weight like a plate. Okay, another one here, a little bit modern, thin paper. You could snap this off with your finger if you wanted to. Very thin shell clam here. It's in fairly deep water, and it's applying this snowshoe strategy. Okay, so they all have the same shape, or what we call, the other one's called the body plan. The iceberg strategy, shown here graphically, this picture of an iceberg with maybe 9 or 10% above the water and most of the material down below. The practitioners of that, like this Mesozoic age oyster, has one valve that's under the mud and then just a little bit sticking up so it can do respiration and feeding, filter feeding. So it's kind of sinking into the mud, but it's sort of sitting there. Another animal that does the same thing as this little tridacna. When you're in shallow water, you see this thing, just the top of it's exposed. Most of it's under the water. Again, using that strategy. Okay, the Tahitian house. This is a strange looking thing. Tahitian house where instead of sitting on the bottom or immersing yourself, you actually are up on pilings, and we have an animal that does that. You can see it here, kind of about the size of my finger. Those aren't teeth. This is a filter feeding animal, but these little sticks here, it projects itself up above the bottom. Okay, so what we didn't know before was what the function of these little sticks, these little spines were, but it's just a Tahitian house. It's sort of sticking up above the bottom. Okay, another one that does something like that. These aren't defensive spines. These are like blade-like. Maybe they're anchoring this thing to the bottom or elevating it, but this is a modern scallop. This is perhaps the same thing. The outrigger canoe, now we've got an extension out there. It keeps the canoe from flipping, but it also distributes the weight of the canoe over a broader area. Animals that would do this are like what we call a brittle star. They're anything but brittle. A body and these long arms that they apply their weight over long stick-like arms. Some of these are in very deep water indeed. If you look at this little snail in my hand, he's got a series of spines. They're sharp little spines, but they're all on one plane. They're all on one plane, and these are not defensive spines, unless you're just going to have an enemy coming from the side. These are actually distributing the weight. This is a classic outrigger canoe strategy. The same thing here with these digitate gastropods. There's the same one we had there a minute ago, and these long spines like that are huge, okay? Odd looking thing, but once you start thinking of it, what is the function of this spine? It's not defensive. It's a way of keeping from sinking into this soft substrate. If you're going to live down there, you've got to deal with the environment. Okay? So we have some examples of the outrigger canoe. Another one is Murex. Probably some of you have seen Murex. I saw some in the store a little bit ago. Long spines, not defensive. They're for distributing the weight of the gastropod or snail. Finally, the Hindenburg, the last one. I like this picture. This animal, the organisms that would practice this, would be like a sea cucumber, a holothurian, which is inflated with water. It's typical of the sea urchins and sand dollars. Ugly thing. Only a mother could love a thing like that. But it's about as big as my leg. But just sort of suspended, almost like a snail. But it's definitely related to sea urchins and sand dollars. It inflates itself, but when you let the water out of it, it goes right down. Here's some in very deep water. This picture was taken in about 13,500 feet of water, not too far from where the Titanic went down, the Atlantic. We see an animal down here, what you call a brittle star, which is using the outrigger canoe strategy, but most of these guys in here are sea cucumbers. Looks like a bunch of sheep grazing. Their bodies inflated with fluid, seawater, and they're just sort of sitting out there. Sea cucumbers holothurians are weird animals. They have other defenses, kind of harmless. If you pick them up, it's like a big sausage or something. And if you poke them and prod them and torment them, they will let out this really bad odor. It doesn't burn you or anything, but it's extremely distasteful. And then if that doesn't work, they literally exvaginate their entrails. They can regenerate those very quickly. And usually that's about that time you put the thing over the side if you're in a boat. So they can take care of themselves. Again, they're using a strategy of the Hindenburg. Okay, let's look at some other things that are kind of, we can figure out the function. We look at the body shape of fish. I just got this out of a biology book. We have all kinds of typical fish, like a sunfish for a perch in here, but if you look at up the top here, we have what we call a platy fish, shaped like a dinner plate up on its edge. Platy fish up in here. Down at this corner, what we call a lunger, which is sort of torpedoed like this pike or a barracuda or something like that. And then over in this side, what we call the cruisers. We classify fish there by the shape, either platies or lungers or cruisers. The cruisers are over here like a tuna or something like that. Open ocean, tireless, day and night swimmers. Okay, let's look at some examples of that. And these animals are just obeying the laws of hydrodynamics. If you're going to live with them in this environment, you're going to have to obey the laws. The platies are here. These animals are built for extremely high maneuverability. Not very fast, but they can turn on a dime. They get this big plate turning sideways. It's like a skier or something. They get very maneuverable, and they're in schools here in classical reef fish, platies, all right? Another example of this from the fossil record. This is a 3 million year MYA, million years ago, angelfish from the Po Valley in Italy. Again, a platy fish built for maneuverability but not speed. But they can elude predators without any difficulty at all. Okay, do we have a modern analog to the platy fish? Why, certainly we do. The modern analog. This is a very maneuverable craft. It's kind of nice when you can put 3 on the thing. But again, in an open sea, it's not all that fast. It's they can make sharp turns on a dime and so forth. Okay, let's look at another example. The cruisers here, which is not only fish, but sharks. Here, what we call an ichthyosaur. We'll see this guy, a reptile here, which is kind of identical to a porpoise. Penguins have this shape. Dolphins, these are mammals. I see a bird here, a mammal, a reptile, and a fish. All 4 animals practicing this. Ratio of length to body length is about 1 to 5. And they have a narrow torpedo-shaped head and kind of a narrow waist at the back end. Tireless open ocean swimmers. What we call the cruisers, all right? The cruisers. Well, is there a modern analog to that? Would be like a submarine, something like that, designed with that in mind. Okay? Finally, the lungers, which is like a AAA trailer dragster or something like that, are length to width ratio of 1 to 10, like a long torpedo-shaped tube. Blinding acceleration. Absolutely, if you've ever been underwater with barracuda, they're not dangerous, but they're just there and gone before you can even think about it. Extremely fast, not that maneuverable. In fact, the analog to the barracuda would be like a torpedo. And anybody will tell you, in aviation, you know that thing is coming, you can evade it with a fighter plane. You have more maneuverability in a fighter plane. It's not particularly maneuverable. It's very dangerous. It's hard to maneuver a submarine to get away from one of these things, but if you know it's coming, you've got at least a fighting chance. So this would be an analog to the Lunger, built for high speed, that kind of predator. Okay, so these animals are, again, applying their body shape to the problems they face. You know what a boxfish is, maybe? A little square thing. Weird looking animal. And the boxfish is designed by nature, by chance, or selection for maneuverability in high turbulence. That's what it's designed for. It's as a reef fish, the water is spread. These guys are maneuvering around. They can go after things, they're predators, but very maneuverable in high turbulence. And this is why we have all these stupid designs on our cars today. You put them in a wind tunnel, and that's the solution to get. Okay, it's the same thing. Maneuverability, and my car looks like this. As hideous as it looks, it doesn't get blown around as much as my older cars did in the wind. And so it's maneuverability and turbulence is causing that. If you look at a humpback whale, one of the interesting things about them is a young humpback. He's got this series of bumps on the front, strophic-looking bumps on the front end of his pectoral fins there. And these appear over and over. This is one that's been cut off. These bumps are on the front here. We wondered what those were for a long time. And what they do, they break up the turbulence. Now we have, you see these on the front edge of a wind generator like this. It breaks up the turbulence. These little bumps are some kind of it's not just a knife edge. There's a real purpose to that. And it's in the way the animal swims. Some of the analogs or mimics are too obvious to say. The track layers, like a caterpillar, you can call it a caterpillar. Both of these, not too hard to figure that out. Hypodermic needles. Then we got rattlesnakes. You get injected by these things. And you get something like this, a Trojan horse. I always like that picture. Something that does not as it seems to be. I always wondered about this. If the enlisted man looked at that thing and said, "Sergeant, what are those portholes on the side?" And he said, "Don't worry about it. What about this stairway into the horse?" Don't worry about that too much. Anyway, so a Trojan horse. Is there a Trojan horse? There's lots of examples of Trojan horses. This is my favorite, personal favorite. There's a clam here. You can see a kind of a sandy bottom. Clam here. What does that look like? Anybody know? A fish to me. Okay. Actually, it's part of the mantle. It's the mantle of the clam, and it's mimicking a mammal. And when something comes close, he feels the pressure. He starts wiggling this thing like crazy, and then fish come close to the. He wants to lure the fish to come in. If you know anything about clams? Clams are filter feeders. They don't eat fish. Okay. And when everything else fails and you kind of run out of ideas, guess reproduction. Your guess should be sex. It's always used that's a last resort. In this case, what the clam is doing, it's a female and she's laid eggs. When fish come in close, these eggs are squirted. They're lured in by this minnow-like mantle. And then these eggs are squirted out and they attach to the fish and get carried off. They use the fish for transport. Classic Trojan horse. The clams don't eat fish. That's just a reproductive strategy to scatter these pieces. Also, it means if you're hooked onto the fish, you're not going to get eaten by something else unless something eats the fish itself. It's a way to move around without getting eaten as part of the plankton. Webs and nets. Lots and lots of examples of that with spiders and fish and so forth. Meat hook, we've got meat hooks back in here. Beautiful example of that. Little fish, the butcher bird, have you heard of this guy? A butcher bird, it's a predator, harmless looking thing, but this guy will impale its prey here on spikes and then feed on this leisure. They're vicious little things. It's a very, very effective predator. Another example is something as simple as armor. Okay, or armor. You see all kinds of examples of this. We came up with that quite a long time ago. A good example of an armored fish here is this jawless fish, 450 million years old, almost a half billion years old. About as big, maybe 3 inches long, about as big as my fist. And then we get reproduction of this thing, just the front edge of it. This is what it looks like. Heads, eyes close together. It's a bony armored fish. Okay, not hard to figure that out. Another animal that's armored the same way as a flea. He's got these plates on the back all fitted together. It's obviously a bit enlarged. You can see this flea with the naked eye without too much trouble, but it's a classic armor on his back. Another armored animal is a pangolin, kind of related to an anteater, although the taxonomy is in doubt right now. Pangolin, if you look at him close up, he's got this beautiful articulated armor, and it's tough, really tough. He also, this is not the only trick though, the pangolin he can run, you can see the armor here, it's pretty well fitted together, but he can also roll into a tight ball, okay? And what I call rope-a-dope. How many of you remember who Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali was? Probably one of the greatest fighters of all time. He would do this thing where he'd get up against the rope, pull his hands together, and then his opposing fighter would sort of beat themselves into exhaustion. It's called rope-a-dope, that's what he called it. It worked pretty well, but if that doesn't work, he can also emit very foul odor, okay? He does all kinds of things. And they're pretty successful animals. The pangolin, which is just an armored mammal. Chainmail, you know what chainmail is, which is put together, kind of woven together from little pieces of steel. The practitioners of that, lots of animals do that, but the most famous ones are sharks. The back of a shark, the skin of a shark is effectively a chainmail. And the little ossicles in there, they're made from the same thing as your teeth. We use those in geology a lot because the little pieces of the chainmail shark, each little piece is specific to that particular shark. So we use them. A shark will leave parts and pieces of teeth like that, but it literally leaves tens of thousands of individual pieces. When these sharks die, the skeleton falls apart, decomposes. Even if it passes through the GI tract of a scavenger, the little pieces will last. They're all over the ocean floor. We use those a lot to get the age of rocks. They're almost indestructible. Let's look at some of those things. When I taught my students these things, to me, the little individual pieces here look like the hood ornament in this particular species of a 53 Pontiac. Have you guys ever had a 53 Pontiac? Another car I had when I was a kid was a 49 Packard. Here's another species of shark. These are almost microscopic. This is a scanning picture, but that's about 1 millimeter across. So if you can see the marks on the edge of time, you can see these things, but you need a microscope to see them really clearly. This is the armor on a shark, basically a chainmail, but this is specific to a certain species of shark, and they're not just generic. You can identify. You don't need the whole shark. All you need is a single dermal ossicle, and you're in business. You can identify the thing. You don't need the whole shark. It's nice to have an articulated skeleton, but the individual pieces are just as distinctive. Okay? Let's look at a sloth. This is an animal I've been working on digging up in Kings Valley, over the range over toward Corvallis. The animal is about maybe 10.5, maybe 3,000 pounds. It stands about 8 feet, 9 feet high. Some of them are pretty good size, big claws, and it's just a herbivore. Look at the skeleton of this guy. He got about 80% of the skeleton myelin on a Harlan ground sloth, and he was in an old spring. We're digging him out piece by piece. We find the bones of the body, individual pieces. They haven't been eaten up or chewed by predators or anything. But what we also find at the same time, in addition to the bones, are these. Now, to me, that looks like something you dig out of a cat box. Does that look like okay, but it isn't. This is a dermal, what we call a dermal ossicle. It is little armor that fits in the skin of that sloth. The sloth has about a 2-inch thick. We found mummies of these things in Nevada. The skin on the back of its neck is about 2 inches thick, and around the stomach it's even ½ an inch thick there. And in that skin is embedded these little dermal ossicles. If you look at the dermal ossicles of the Harlan ground sloth, they're this diamond shape. Once you see them, you hang them, hold them in your hand, you'll never forget them. Okay, Harlan ground sloth, they all look the same. They all look the same. The diamond shape is very characteristic. Each sloth has a different shape. So again, it's nice to have the entire skeleton, but we don't get those very often. But we do find if you have a single ossicle, you got the animal. And we're confident in that. So we use them in that way. Here, I've just got a knife in there for scale. All right, so what would a modern analog be to dermal ossicles in a sloth's hide? Well, that would be maybe these studs like that in a hoodlum's jacket, or a motorcycle hoodlum, something like that. Again, decorative. These are decorative, but it's a kind of an armor in effect. can articulate it. They don't touch each other. They're all kind of independent, but it makes it even harder to get through the skin of this guy. Okay? Let's talk about airplanes for a minute. Reproduction of the Curtiss pusher. It's got fixed landing gear, very old-fashioned airplane. It has fixed landing gear. Another one has fixed landing gear is a hang glide. Now, let's see, what do you call these things? Ultralights, right? He's got fixed landing gear because he's got plenty of power. The minute birds got the power of flight, their landing gear is almost always retractable. Why would they have retractable landing gear when we didn't? It took a long time for us to come up with retractable landing gear. The landing gear is a tremendous drag on the airplane. When the bird's doing this thing by hand, he's pumping his wings, we got all the power of the gasoline, the internal combustion engine. So there was no need to come up with retractable landing gear. But once, if you want to have a very fast airplane, you make the landing gear retractable. They came up with this very quickly because they're actually putting out the energy. But for us in airplanes, you don't need it for a long time. Retractable landing gear. Another thing is a moving airfoil, like a helicopter. And the analogy to a moving airfoil would be maybe something like this, 3-foot wingspan on a dragonfly. This is an amazing animal. That's been in the fossilization process. The body and the skin and wings and so forth have been replaced by fool's gold, by pyrite. And these collectors buy and sell these things. It's an amazing specimen, huge thing. But it actually works pretty much like a helicopter. It can stop and back up and rotate in flight like a rotating wing aircraft. Okay, what about flight? As a paleontologist, that was one of the things that bothered me most. How do you, until you get the wing exactly right, this is something Wilbur and Orville Wright found out, until you get it right, it doesn't work. And the penalty for a mistake is usually death. I mean, you fly down, we had people trying this and they got knocked off. We made airplanes, we copied birds. This was a replica of an early, didn't work, okay? It was supposed to be power, we don't have nearly the power. People would fly these things and they get themselves killed before they could get it to work. But the question is, how do you make something like that evolve all the way up into that thing, trial and error? Because it looks to me like every time you did a trial, you'd be knocked off. But they did it somehow. Let's look at some examples of that. The flyer does work. If we look at the bird wing of a bird, the bones on a bird up in here, a mammal, a bat, and then down here a pterosaur, a flying reptile. They all do the same thing. They're similar in many ways, except the classic airfoil. If it's not just right, it doesn't work. And then the pterosaur, I want to look at this little bone here, kind of shaped like a tomahawk. That's the upper arm bone. It's characteristic of pterosaurs. They're a gliding membrane. They all have the same function, and they came up with this completely independent of each other. I can promise you the reptiles, the mammals didn't watch the reptiles flying and said, man, I got to do that. They came up with this. And their airfoils work. No question they work rather well. Okay, so if we look at some of these things, this is a little, about a 200 million year old reptile. It's about as big as a sparrow, Ichthyosaurus. And he's got, you can see on the front of the wing here, a little flange right there on that. That's the humerus bone right there. They all have to have that, at least the reptiles. Another one of the same thing. This is a guy from built like a canard, more of a glider than a flyer. Lots and lots of reptiles, small ones. You don't hear much about them in the geologic record. Here's one from the Jurassic, about as big as maybe a chicken, not shaped like a chicken. But look at the humerus bone. It's got the little flange sticking out. That bone tells me it's often a pterosaur. Nicely preserved. This is a beautiful specimen, preserved, and it is a flying reptile. Okay. We got examples of what they call the parachuting frog. He can spread out his fins almost like a parachute, which is not flight, but it's close. Here's a Permian guy, about 250 million years old. What looks like wings in the back, they figured out, probably it's an underwater, it's a swimming animal, using these for rowing in effect, not for flight, not with wings like that. It kind of starts out, you ask yourself, what was that structure before it was a wing? Because until it was perfect, it didn't work, okay? And then when it's perfect, it does work. All right, insects came up with this really fast. Insects that are flying way back in the geologic record. This is a mosquito. They were a pest then, they're a pest now. But they're efficient little flyers. This guy is almost identical to modern mosquitoes, and it's 50 million years old. These are the Barry Goldwater of the animal world. They just don't change. They change. The same thing here. We got a beetle. This is extremely rare to have the color on the wing preserve, but we're looking at the wing itself. Again, it hasn't changed much in all that time. This is another 50 million year old beetle. Here is a flying insect, which is a mantis. You see what's left of its wing up there along the beautiful preserve. But again, their insects came up with this pretty, and once they acquired this talent, they kept it, and they didn't have to make many changes. Okay, we came to this slowly. You start with a parachute. You can evolve from a parachute to, I'll call it a paraglider or something like that, to maybe a, what do they call these things? Help me. Hang glider. Thank you very much. I can have senior moments. Come on. Okay, and you go to finally a regular glider. No margin of error. Also perfect, actually. Very beautifully designed. Extremely strong. No margin of error. You're going to fall so far if you make a mistake in these things. But again, you got to ask yourself, when we evolve these things very slowly and carefully. Okay. We got a big bird, what we call the big bird. There's a dig we're doing at Woodburn, an ice age, about a 12,000-year-old dig. We're digging at Woodburn. We've been finding elephants and camel, some horses, bison, things like that in there. We also found one of the humors, one of the bones, and finally about 6 or 8 bones of a very large pterotorn, like a vulture. 13-foot wingspan was the biggest for this one in Woodburn is 16 feet. I think we've got fighter planes that are smaller than that, but 16-foot wingspan. This is an interesting bird because with this big wingspan, the modern vultures are a scavenger, but this is not a scavenger, it was a predator. When you're that big, you don't have to wait around for cars and have something off to eat it. You're going to have, this is actually a raptor, but it evolved, it changes later into a scavenger. So like a vulture. So if we look at that particular animal, person here, man, that's an eagle, that's my bird. Okay, 16-foot wingspan. It's a huge thing. Okay, the largest bird we know of all time is a Pliocene, about 3 million year old bird, 22-foot wingspan, and that is small, bigger than a lot of fighter planes. Jet fighters are smaller than that. The specimen, this is just the outline. We don't find the whole bird. This is from Peru. They got the bones of this guy though, but it is a giant bird. And again, it's not a scavenger. It's a raptor. It's like an eagle or something like that. Probably just about ape ever wanted to with a size like that. Okay. But a beautiful bird. Okay, the question is, why did insects? How did insects acquire? This is a bat, of course. I've got a wing of a bat on top of a skeleton. He's got his bats folded, his wings folded. The question is, why did insects acquire it so quickly? And the answer is because they're so small. For an insect to free fall 3 feet is nothing. If I free fell 3 feet, if I fell that far, I wouldn't be around. I mean, even 3 feet can be fatal if you're over the age of 70, which I am, okay? The weight is a problem, okay? So an insect is no big thing. If you drop that far, you drop 100 feet, your terminal velocity, you're not even going to bounce when you hit the ground. It's kind of light, okay? So with that kind of weight, it's true, you're blown around by the wind, but you can experiment with flight and gliding and hang gliding and parachuting without the penalty of getting squashed when you fall down out of the sky. The size is why the insect probably succeeded in doing this. Let's look at some other examples, what we call rear-wheel drive. Horses are rear-wheel drive. If you watch a jockey and a horse, he gets off those, he doesn't want to touch that backside. He gets as close to the withers as he can, but he's got his butt up off the thing. He's way up here in the withers. That's the leg that does the dirty work. That's the powers of those hind legs. The only function of those front legs is to keep that thorax off the ground. That's all it does. Otherwise, he'd be scraping along with his nose. Let's look at an example of that. Horse, if you look at the hind leg on a horse, you got the hoof down here, and these are the digits, 3 digits, the cannon bone. This is the one I'm interested in, this bone here and that bone, and this is the part of the tibia and fibula. But those bones, let's enlarge those bones on the horse skeleton. Look at them a little closer. You can touch this one, that's your heel bone. That's the calcaneum there, and that's the ankle bone. The ankle bone's called the astragalus. Are you writing this down? It's the calcaneum's here, that's the heel bone, this is the astragalus of the ankle bone. Let's look at the astragalus. Pull it out and look at it. And this is about as close, this is the astragalus. What is designed that you can cock that leg up, move it completely, almost that many degrees, almost 180 degrees. It is almost a wheel. It's as close as the animal's ever got to a wheel. The problem is you can't get blood and nerve to a wheel like that. This is a modern horse. This is a prehistoric horse. They're exactly the same. Once they came up with this, they just kind of, they made all kinds of, they made them bigger, made them smaller, but once they got the design correctly, then they made different sizes. This little guy is clearly from a horse. It's a 50-million-year-old horse. This is a modern horse. It's a little bit larger, but the bones are absolutely identical. The ankle bone of a horse. And this is that. That's what allows you to get that hind leg, all that power. You can cock the arm completely up and then fire it backwards pretty effectively. It gets all those drive off the hind leg. Looking at a weight belt, and divers got brass shoes so they won't rust. Weight belt and shoes. A heavy weight belt here. These are heavy shoes. The animal that does this is the same thing. You see, I think that's my youngest daughter's hand there. We're in Taiwan, and she's looking at a fossil sand dollar, or sea urchin, in fact. It's about a 4-million-year-old sand dollar. And if you take that sand dollar, smaller ones, the way these things live, some of them do anyway, some of them are just buried, but some of them actually live, they're like cookies, kind of stuck into the sediment, and the little fannies are up in there. They're a filter feeder, so the current is coming from us that way. So the current is picking up on the backside of these things, and they're just filter feeding, like a clam. Okay, so it's got his front edge. Well, how does he do that? How does he keep the front edge buried without just flopping down? The way he does it's kind of clever. Okay, now what I've done, I've taken on this particular species of sand dollar came from here in Oregon, about as big as a dime, and I've kind of opened it up. I've taken the top off and flipped. This is the top inside. This is the crown of the sand dollar. Okay, in the crown he's got sand. The function of the sand, it's like a weight belt. It keeps him. This is in a very turbulent water, up in the beach almost. But what's interesting about him, he's also got this dark sand on the anterior or front edge. He's got this dark sand. And that is a mineral called either chromite or magnetite or ilmenite. Those particular, all three elements or minerals are very, very heavy. They're what we call the black sands. So this guy somehow can distinguish between the quartz and feldspar here sand and this darker sand. It's heavier. He puts that in the front end of his shell, okay? Which is pretty clever. Now, if he can't find chromite or ilmenite or magnetite, he'll use something else, like gold, or platinum, or silver. They'll use these things. Now, how do they do that? I don't know. This is a little, simple little sand dollar. They do that. Well, he's got weight material all through the thing, but it's all focused in front because he's sticking into the sand. That kind of anchors him down. Pretty clever. I don't have any idea how they make that distinction. They actually look at these things as some way of distinguishing it, and they put them where they belong. Okay. Look at a dart gun, like an arbalete. The practitioners of these are like a Madarian or a coral anemone. Most of you have probably dragged your hand across one of these green anemones in a tide pool, and it feels sticky because what's happening is he's firing these little miniature darts in your hand. They're not harmful. They just stick to your finger. But in the tropics, they can almost kill you. They're very painful, these things. It's a little dart. He shoots this thing out, and if you're prey, he'll pull that in and eat it. It's just a classic dart gun with a kind of a spear with a string on the end of it, a little coral, all magnified high. But when you do that sometimes, drag your hand through a tide pool, those green anemones, they won't hurt you, but you feel them, it feels like it's sticky or something, and that's what these little things are shooting into your finger, into your skin. Doesn't do any harm at all. And then but you can feel these little darts sticking into your hand. Tattoos, okay? Who's really proud of those tattoos? What about tattoos? This is a modern tattoo. The animals that practice tattooing are snails. Well, there are actually several. The snails are pretty good at it. These are sought after by collectors. The tattooing material is this brown material because it's not ink. When you're in high school, when I was in high school, some of my friends were tattooing themselves. They were kind of slow girls, but they'd scratch themselves with a knife, and then they'd rub ballpoint pen and ink into that, and then it would heal. Have a nice little girl's initials or something like that. All right, so they use ballpoint penning. This isn't ink. What this is fetal material. You all know what that is? Okay, so he's tattooing himself with fetal material as he grows, okay? but it is a tattoo. It creates a pattern as he lives his lifestyle. Okay? We see all kinds of examples of blades and cutting edges. This is a blade off of a beaver. A beaver has kind of a self-sharpening tooth, and people say it's as sharp as a razor. I hate that phrase. If something is sharp as a razor, I want to be able to shave with it. You think you can shave with that? No way. But there is one blade you actually can shave with. Let's see what it is. This is another one with a self-sharpening tooth. This is a muskrat, it's the same as a beaver, kind of a first cousin. That little square here is about 3/8 of an inch, about a centimeter across. So these are small. This is the upper tooth, this is the lower tooth, and when the tooth touches each other, they sharpen every time the teeth close and open. This is the lower jaw. The tooth right there, this is the same tooth that goes, curves back. It's growing constantly as the animal lives. So it's got to be the chord of the circle. You can't have a kink in it. It's going to grow. So the tooth end is in here, that's the business end, and then the other end is way back in here. So if you had a root canal, the doctor, the dentist would start back in the middle. Okay? It's kind of bad. But this happens to be a muskrat. But let's look at an example of a tooth that's extremely sharp. Go back to our bat. This is a 50 million-year-old bat from Wyoming, about as big as a sparrow. Looking at a vampire bat, a modern one, from the top we can see these fangs on the top like that. They don't actually use those the way you think they are. The fangs, these are the teeth that work. That's the business end. Those teeth there literally are as sharp as a razor. All he does, he makes a little surgical cut, and he sets her in luck. He doesn't suck the blood, he licks it up. Okay? But those teeth, of all the biological systems, they really are as sharp as a razor. I don't use a bat head to shave myself. I'd have to be a real purist. And then these, I don't know, the big fangs here, I guess those are for social purposes. But the ones that didn't work, these little fangs on top, he makes a little cut, blood comes out. He also uses an enzyme that keeps your blood from clotting, and you just get a dinner of blood. It licks it up. Okay? But it is sharp as a razor. Another example of a cutting tool is a serrated blade. A serrated blade is when you're too cheap to have a knife that can really sharpen like that. And the practitioners of this go back to the sharks again. He's got a serrated tooth here. This is a modern great white shark. It's about a 2-inch fish, top to bottom. Let's look at the other shark, the older model of a great white shark. It's the same shark. This is a big one. That's the one we just looked at. It's a whole lot bigger. He's just scaled down. That's all it is. Remember the horse was bigger, the modern horse was bigger. In this case, the ancient shark tooth is a lot bigger than the modern one. But again, it's kind of hard to see, but the tooth is serrated on the edge. Okay? 20-million-year-old great white shark. Using a serrated blade. Another animal that has a serrated blade, a lot of the animals, this idea of a saber tooth with a canine is elongated, very big, long canine. A lot of animals do this. There's a dog-like animal that does it. There's a couple of reptiles that do it, and then a lot of mammals. Cats do this, and they arrived at this stabbing tooth. And almost all of them, I would say 80% of them, had on the trailing edge of that tooth, if you look closely at one of these museum specimens, they're serrated, just like a cheap steak knife. That's how they work. You can saw in that thing. All right, so we got a example there. Camouflage. To me, this looks like a really, really bad hair day. All right, so what's the strategy? He's doing two things to effectively using camouflage. You want to match the background. You do that. You want to play in the background, but you want to break up your outline. That's what this funny-looking hair stuff does. Believe me, close up, these guys are almost invisible. You have to break up the outline with this fuzzy stuff, and then you have to match the color, camouflage, to make it effective. Okay, so you see some examples. A goosefish, not that big an animal. It's what we call a lion-weight predator. This is obviously not what we call a pursuit predator, which runs down its prey. No, this guy just sits there until you get close enough. He's hiding, he's breaking up his outline. You can see the eye there, the other eye. Gets close enough, he naps you. He's a lion-weight predator, like a mousetrap. You get close enough, you're gone, okay? A nice job of camouflage, okay? Another job of camouflage is a stargazer, which is about as big as my fist. He's now under the water. That's his mouth. You can barely see. You can lure these things out, bring them up to the surface with a lure, hideously ugly. But they're another lion-weight predator, nicely camouflaged. The skin of these things matches a sandy background. They kind of wiggle down the same hide. Pretty effective for camouflage. Okay, let's look at another example of camouflage. Probably the best that I know of. leafy sea dragon, kind of a seahorse, a fish type. He's got the color, they match the local algae out in the Sargasso Sea, and then he breaks that up with these leaf-like appendix. They'll all be in the same animal. There's a guy there, and this is a predator. He's just a little line-weight predator, extremely effective. And you can't see these things, so you're right on top of them, and they have to move, and then you spot them. One more, okay? Now, I did not kill a fish to make this slide, okay? This is my spear, okay? But I saw the fish, and he sort of draped across the flounder. You can see both of his eyes. They kind of have eyes on the same side of his head. All right, he's looking, this is a kind of what we call a calcareous or a coral debris sand. And his interpretation of the sand is he makes these little circles of turquoise. Can you see that in the back? Say yes. Yeah. Very good. Okay, we're going to do just fine. Don't worry. Okay, that's what he thinks this looks like. And actually, when he's got it put together, it's hard to see this guy. I disturbed him. He swam a few feet away. I put the spear down for scale, took the picture. I didn't kill him, okay? Now, we want to go in now, we want to go get one of these things. They have something else they can do. He can match the background, he can fade in the background, he breaks up the outline really nice. This is not a predator. He's actually hiding from his predators. But we can squeeze him by putting him into a laboratory environment and putting him against the background and see what he can do on checkerboard. Not bad, okay? So he's sitting there, he's sweating bullets. Do they see me? But that's pretty darn good. It's a lot better than I could do, I can tell you. He can change the spots, okay? Zipper, did I get your attention there? Zipper, okay. All right, we look at a grass, you look at a grass, and you look at that again. Look at a grass stem. This is under high magnification. The leaves, the veins in a grass stem are parallel. When you peel apart a grass stem lengthwise, what you're doing is you're unzipping it. Let's take the whole little section, raise the magnification now. Look at those, right there. It's a zipper. The little cells are zipped together. So when you pull them apart, you're unzipping those cells. Okay, so it's a zipper. There's lots of examples of zippers fitted together rather nicely. Lots of good examples of zippers in nature. A hardened cutting edge stud of carbide or something like that, very hardened steel. Same thing with a tire here. We have a studded tire, rubber with these studded things like that. We have an example of that, certainly. Go back to the grass stem, and we got the zippers, yeah, but these little things in here look like blood cells, not that big, are called phytoliths. They're little pieces of glass, silica. They're made out of opaline silica, precious opal, and a little kind of disc-shaped thing. Each grass has a different shape to them. Some of them are kind of dumbbell shaped, some of them are circular shaped. I can identify the grass just from the phytoliths. The grass stem can be rotted or decomposed, and I can still identify it. But what these are is like an armor. They're in the shell. It won't stop a horse from eating it, but it slows it down a little bit. Kind of a half-hearted arm, phytoliths. It's like a carbide stud of a tire. Right? Another one is a chainsaw. The example of a chainsaw, my best example, is a snail. Now I've got, and I did kill an animal to do this, I've got 3 predatory snails here. And the snails have been turned loose. I strapped the oyster down, I sacrificed the oyster, strapped him down and turned the snails loose. And shortly after that, the snails roll straight in with this thing. They've got this long tongue called a radula, and the tongue's got kind of a abrasive surface on the outside. He's just cutting into the thing and bore a hole into It's cut in, they just drill right in. Snails are incredible animals. The snail tongue magnified, and this is the cutting edge or the part that works on the chainsaw. Okay? You all know what Velcro is. In fact, the idea for Velcro, another picture of Velcro, the same thing, that you know what that is. The idea was actually the person who invented that, didn't really invent it, he was looking at a sandbird, and so those little hooks there, and I got the idea. Okay? Nothing to that. Now, another example of Velcro, let's go back to these animals. It's a reptile, which is very convergent with a porpoise. It's definitely a reptile. And they found whole skeletons of these things. They don't find the soft part, but they do find where the stomach was. And in the stomach, you can actually find the stomach cavity, and you can extract them. They're a couple 100 million years old, but you can actually get the stomach out and find these little tiny fossils. And what they find inside are things like this, okay? Little hooks like that. This is a millimeter, from there to there. Millimeter, that's the width of a dime, the thickness of a dime. So if you can see the marks on the edge of a dime, you can see those little things, little hooks. Okay, what are the hooks? What the hooks are the ancient squid, which is what these ichthyosaurs ate, didn't have suckers. What they had instead was little hooks like Velcros, and they would glom onto their prey with these hooks and pull them in. Some of the modern squid maintain this. By the way, the hook, he's just bothering me. It's not attacking him. He doesn't like it, but this one's got suckers. But some of the modern squids still have the Velcro on top, little hooks like that. Okay. So we can find these. This means that these animals, these ichthyosaurs, are eating the squid, these ancient squid. These are a couple 100 million years old. And then they're passing it through the GI tract, but in the stomach stored, left behind, are these thousands and thousands of little Velcro hooks from the squid that they ate off. Snap fasteners. An example of snap fasteners. Go back to the trilobite. There's a 350 million year old, third of a billion year old trilobite. Rather nice specimen from Ohio. He's unrolled, but he can roll up as tight as a pill book on the side. When you look at him from the side when he's rolled up, he's got a little snap fastener on the bottom of his chin and the back of his butt here that snaps together. You can see how it works. They're not flexible anymore, but he does have a snap, so he can roll up in a tight ball, and he doesn't have to hold himself. He snaps together. It's almost impossible. It would have been impossible to break these things open. They had a nice little effective shell, and they can just roll up tight like that with a snap fastener. Paper manufacture. Nothing mysterious about that. A lot of animals manufacture paper, like the paper wasp here. Another one is plywood. By making plywood is you change the grain at right angles on little thin pieces and glue it together, which increases the strength of the wood by about 8 to 12 times, depending on what wood it is. But we have examples of plywood in a clamshell. It's not made out of wood, but the mineral in a clamshell has a grain to it, just like wood. So these grains, he's got this one going this way, this one that way, this one going that back and forth. It's plywood. He's just using plywood. A clamshell can be very, very thin, but extremely strong. It's made like plywood, not just ordinary calcium carbonate. He's using this trick of changing the direction of the grains. You know how plywood works. Pretty good, pretty effective. A brick wall, where you can take a single little piece and put it together by overlapping it. And this is the same thing on another clamshell. The individual crystals on an abalone, which is an aragonite, are fitted together just like a Roman wall. The pieces are all overlapping like a brick wall. Again, extremely strong. They're all kind of glued together. Rather nice. Another example of construction, we'll see that in a minute. Okay, let's take a file here. Look at an example of a file. We'll go back to the snail tongues. I like those. The snail tongue, most snails are herbivores, and they just file off or tear off algae from rocks. They feed on rocks, and they have a kind of a tongue, which is like a file. It looks like this. This is a radula of a grazing snail. They eat algae off these things like that, and just rubs it off like a file. Now let's look at the file. Well, you saw one, but this is another one of a predatory snail, and that would be like a rasp. If you know what a rasp is, that's when you're really getting after the wood, right? Big hooks on the thing. Okay, a rasp would be a predatory snail. Looks like that. Okay? Just a snail, the tongue. Okay, nothing. One's a file, one's a rasp. They do different things. They have a different shape. They're all rather well adapted. Okay, stone masonry. I did this about a C+ for a project. But we got a little guy here, and he's in chambers. This is a protozoan, single cell animal. That's from across this thing is about the size of the head of a straight pan. Big enough to see with the naked eye, but you couldn't see this detail. But the piece is, let's enlarge that piece and look at that detail in great detail. Look at it now, you can see this wall he's made. Very nice wall of just individual pieces. You've got a little fossil here, but these are little pieces of potassium feldspar and ports and so forth. You put them together to match a nice little wall. Pretty nice job. Better job than one we had before. Okay, getting now too close to the end. Face painting. I used to have this. I gave this talk a long time ago, and I used to have a picture of Tammy Faye Baker. Okay. But no, and this is a perfect group. I should have had that, but she's dead now. It'd be kind of crude to do that to her. But I gave it to a high school group, and nobody knew who the hell she was. But anyway, face painting. They're very clever, but you can't outdo nature. There's no way. These things are amazing. Okay, let's see if we can summarize. Okay, so the Trojan horse. If you guessed minnow on that Trojan horse, you were literally outwitted by a clam. Think about that. Okay, nothing is really new. In these innovations, if you're willing to go back in the fossil record, you can find examples from modern animals and plants, but if you're willing to go back in the fossil record, there's all kinds of examples. And they keep these innovations that developed millions and millions of years ago. All good. And not only that, but they were reinvented without any help, independently, over and over again. Not just one time, they would come up with the same solution independently. So, okay, the technology of tattoos as practiced by the snails leaves a little bit to be desired. Okay? I won't go into that. The flounder, I give the flounder about maybe a B+, maybe an A-, something like that. And then last here, the ability to fly, very difficult, extremely difficult, at least not for everything but insects. But all the vertebrate groups do this, even fish do this, because the rewards are so great. Either for grabbing your prey or evading something, nothing can beat it. Maybe the last one. Okay, thank you for your attention.
If you have questions.
Question here.
Does anybody know how these little things that were at the beach went out and evolved into the deep sea?
That's a good question. What she's asking is, what I'm telling you is that empirically we found, when we look at the fossil record, we see of animals evolving or appearing for the first time in shallow water, and then that critter going into deep water. You know, we start walking down the continental shelf, okay? Gets into deep water and then gets out there and croaks. That means he dies, right? Okay, or he goes extinct. Now, why? And the answer, I think, that most of the biologists will tell you is that they're being chased by, they're being pursued by, not chased, but they're being pushed out of their niche by something else that's more successful behind them. New forms are almost always more successful, a little more innovative. But they think that they're just out-competed for that particular niche, and they're being pushed out of their environment.
It's not because they evolved their body to
No, they're moving into another environment, and they're evolving in response to that environment. Other questions? Question here.
Do mollusks and things of that sort, is there any kind of sexuality attached to their birth or development, or
yeah, he's asking about the mollusk, okay? Well, that's dear to my heart, too. Anyway, when I was in harness at the university, I taught paleontology, and my X-rated lectures were on snails. Snails are really strange animals. The snails can change their sex from season to season. Well, people do that in Eugene all the time. We really go there. A snail will have a male organ that's about maybe 40% of his body size. It'd be like my legs. I mean, they're gigantic. They do all kinds of strange things that in their reproductive cycles. You'll see, how many of you ever seen this fossil? It's a kind of a circular, bunch of snails in a circle. You ever seen one of those things? It's a bunch of females, and it's a reproductive cycle, and they're rare as far. Well, you see them sometimes. It's called, let me think of that. It's called a slipper shell, and Crepidula, that's the name of the genus. The genus is Crepidula, slipper shell. They are found as fossil in a circle. They glue on each other's back. They're all girls. And the name of the species is Crepidula fornicata. Get it?
Yeah.
Okay, so they do that. In fact, a lot of times when you run out of ideas, you look at a structure on an animal and you just, what could this possibly be for? Always guess, and everything else done, guess sex, okay? If you know anything about Washington, D.C. and politics, males will do anything for sex. Okay. I mean, it's just our nature, okay? My father used to say, he's dead now 10 years, he died when he was about 94, and he said, sex is one of the most powerful forces of nature, more powerful than gravity, more powerful than light. He said it's amazing with all the things that trouble you can get into with sex. But yeah, the whole reproductive cycle, we have whole groups of animals where they have three kinds of animals. Two of them are two different kinds are produced asexually. You don't have to have boy and girl. And the third kind is produced sexually, and all three look different. They all three look quite different. So as paleontologists were looking at these things, we would classify them as three separate species. We'd have these enormously high diversity populations of animals. We couldn't figure out why it was so high. We were classifying everything as different species. In fact, a lot of times the boys would look different from the girls. Well, that'd be two species because we couldn't tell them apart, which is which. So we just gave them the same different names. Pardon me, one genus with two different names. But actually, there are several ways that you kind of have to. It's really hard though because you can't watch their behavior. You don't really know. You can guess at it that maybe one's asexually reproduced, one's sexually reproduced. But usually the answer we use is just name a whole new species. It's got to be wrong. Good question. Question here.
Yeah, in the emerging field of biomimicry, a lot of biomimics are biologists and ecologists, and I was wondering if you might want to mention something about how you feel paleontology can offer a unique perspective of biology, various biology.
Yeah, I'll go back to what you asked about biomimicry. The way I practice it is a little different. When the biologist can watch an animal, they can watch their behavior, and they can watch them through a life cycle, several life cycles. And then not only can I not do that, all I have are the skeletons, either a shell or a pellicle or a skeleton or something like that, but I don't have the soft parts, which in many ways is the best part. I can't watch them alive. All my animals are dead, and so I just have this great diversity of animals. A lot of times my colleagues at the university, they would put me on as the fifth or sixth member of a PhD committee because they had to have somebody outside of the department. You have to have 4 or 5 people on the committee for a PhD committee, and they had to have somebody outside. They didn't want a physicist or a chemist. The geologist wasn't too good, but what about a paleontologist? He studies life forms. Stick him on there, okay? So I would find myself on these committees evaluating some biologists, and half the time I didn't even know what they were doing, and it was really interesting. But that was as close as they could get. But to answer your question, there's not much. They're the same in name, but the way we practice it and the way the biologists practice, it really is biomimicry. We've not much relationship. Just saying that we don't have much. We just have these little pieces, but that's all we have. That's all anybody has. Actually, not quite, because now they've been successful. How many of you saw Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
In Jurassic Park, they took a mosquito, which was supposed to suck the blood of a dinosaur, and the mosquito was supposed to come out of the Dominican Republic. Well, the Dominican Republic, there are amber deposits with mosquitoes in them, no question, but they're only 35 million. And the last dinosaur died 66 million years ago. That part didn't work, but I thought it was a creative idea for Crichton to come up with that. Extremely clever. We have now successfully extracted DNA from fossils as old as 350 million years, okay? Nobody's going to try to recreate the animal from the DNA. It's interesting because a lot of times you find a fossil animal, you have no idea what it is. Is it a mollusk? Is it an arthropod? At least you can tell what group it falls into. At least you can say, well, it's in this group. And the people always ask me, well, wouldn't you like to take DNA and create a dinosaur or an elephant or something like that? No. If I'm going to create something, I'm going to make Jane Mansfield or something like that. Come on, let's be creative here. But we are getting DNA, and they use it to determine just at least a phylum. At least they can get a phylum. So a lot of things in the geologic record, we don't have any idea what they are. We think we know, but we're not sure. But if you can get the DNA, and it's remarkably, sometimes pretty well preserved. You're not going to recreate the animal, I don't think, but at least it'll tell you where you're at, if your taxonomy is right, or if you're on the right track. Somebody else had a question. Well, listen, I enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me.